Hi, everybody. This is Steve, and I'm here today with Dan Schultz. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome. Let's start off this way. I refer to you as a freedom fighter. Do you consider yourself a freedom fighter?
Um, yes, in that I grew up knowing and appreciating early on that we live in a free country, unlike most countries where we're free to voice our concerns about what the government is doing to us, that the people are in charge of the government, or at least we were. I'm not so sure that we are anymore. And that's why I do what I do. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fight peacefully in the way all of us should be fighting to preserve our liberties, get our liberties back. And I learned it at an early age. And the way to do that is by participating in the process. There was a concept that nobody talks about anymore, it seems, civic duty, civic responsibility. I was taught those things in seventh grade in civics. I was taught it by my parents and my grandparents and my parents and grandparents, friends and associates. I saw people, ordinary people like my parents. I did not grow up wealthy, far from it. Both my parents grew up on farms here in Wisconsin. I'm in Wisconsin right now in my hometown, and I live in Arizona otherwise. But when I grew up, I was ingrained with concepts and values that came, I think, out of the Depression, because everybody worked together to try to get through the Depression, and nobody threw anything away. They always asked before they threw something away, can I use this in the future? Can I give it to somebody? Is it useful? You know, my parents knew how to can vegetables. They always had a garden. One of the phrases that I remember is the phrase, many hands make light work. So, you know, my dad had been in the service briefly. He was in the American Legion. He was a city councilman. He was a county board member. My mother knew how to do all of these things. She was a den mother for a while, worked with the Salvation Army. Everybody was expected to do their civic duty, you know, serve on school board if there was a need. And it was all about making our system work. And there's another term that I learned back then. It was these concepts of civic responsibility and civic duty were encompassed within something called basic American civics. You wanted to know, okay, how do I vote? If I wanted to involve myself in a political party, how would I do that? Kids were taught that in seventh grade back in Wisconsin. When my parents grew up, my dad and he had 7 brothers. They all attended a one-room schoolhouse in a little town called Cream, Wisconsin, and then went on to all graduate from high school in the late 30s and mid 40s. My dad was the last to graduate from high school. He was the youngest of 8 brothers, and they were all taught these things. They learned Robert's Rules of Order in grade school. And I know that because one of my uncles taught my dad for a while. They told us that they learned how to do that. But when things changed over the years, when I graduated from high school, I graduated in 1974, we were taught basic American civics, but we did not get a full-blown set of instructions and teachings with respect to how to run a meeting using Robert's rules, because the teachers usually did that for us when we had our meetings. But now, since then, I've learned the rudiments of Robert's rules, and everybody should. Robert's rules is a daunting task, because the book is about this thick, but there are plenty of tutorial videos on YouTube. There's plenty of cheat sheets that you can find. And if you want to learn the basics, you can learn the basics. But I think we're at a tipping point in the United States right now where we have to rediscover basic American civics and the concepts of civic responsibility and civic duty. And that's how I am fighting as a freedom fighter. I'm trying to educate others. And that's why I created my website. I wrote a little book about what I learned in 7th grade civics. And I speak whenever and however I can to conservative groups. I am a Trump supporter. I want everybody to involve themselves in politics. And I don't care if it's Democrats as well. There's an old saying about bad ideas are driven out by good ideas. And I think our conservative ideas are better than the leftist ideas. And I think I can actually reach some good, decent people who grew up and became Democrats. It's usually because, their parents were Democrats, or maybe their parents were in a union and they just said, we've always got to vote Democrat. But a lot of those people, I think, are reachable. I think our ideas of liberty and free enterprise, anti-collectivism are better than their ideas. One of the books that I reference in my book is the book by Barry Goldwater, The Conscience of a Conservative. I highly recommend everybody read that book as well. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give the tools, basic American civics tools, to everybody in the country, and have them maybe follow my lead and the leads of others. When I do my podcasts every day, I talk about these things. It's basically an instructional podcast, taking some facet of basic American civics and trying to impart that on my audience. When I've been on, like, for example, Steve Bannon's War Room, he was gracious enough to have me on, and I used to write articles at Breitbart.com about the precinct committeeman strategy. My site is precinctstrategy.com. What I've always tried to do is ask Steve, hey, let's bring on some success stories, and so that people can see ordinary, just people, Americans, getting involved where and how it really matters politically, and that's inside of a political party committee at the local level. And how did I come to meet you? I met you through Steve Stern. How did I meet Steve Stern? Steve Stern saw me on War Room and contacted me. Then I told Steve Bannon, hey, you ought to have Steve Stern on. He's doing tremendously good things in Broward County, Florida. He's got his flag shirt company that helps with patriotism, so that's what I've been doing. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. I'm so impressed by your family heritage of civic duty. And you mentioned a few books. Are there any other books that have inspired and informed you and kept you motivated to carry out your civic duty, either religious, secular, or otherwise?
Well, of course, the Bible. And then there's some more recent books that I've discovered along the way. The Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder Lane. Rose Wilder Lane is the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Rose Wilder Lane wrote this book, I believe, in around 1941. It's a free download at the von Mises Institute, but I bought the hard copy as well, or it's a softbound copy. That's a great book. Essentially what she teaches is there's no authority over man, none. What goes on between our ears, nobody has control of that yet. But people are trying to convince you that there's something called authority, government, the Pope, for example. She writes that Islam was actually hijacked from Muhammad hundreds of years after he had died. He was actually a very peaceful man, she writes. It's a very fascinating book. I highly recommend it. She did not go to formal school. She was in the Little House on the Prairie book. She was one of the daughters of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So that's a great book. Another book is Your American Yardstick. Your American Yardstick. It's still in print. It was written by I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was written by a Notre Dame law graduate who went on to become an attorney. And it's 12 basic principles of Americanism. And I bought a copy for all of my kids. Another book I love is Paul Revere's Ride by David Hackett Fisher, I believe is the name. David Hackett Fisher. Paul Revere's Ride. It's a great book about the birthing of the country and how we came together to win our freedom from the British. There's another book I like called The Minutemen by a retired Supreme Allied Commander General John Galvin, also a West Pointer like me. Excellent book. He grew up in Massachusetts. He was fascinated by Lexington and Concord, and the fact that pastors during the pre-Revolutionary War era oftentimes were the militia commanders, the local Minutemen regiment commanders. They'd have their Sunday services, and then afterwards, once a month, they'd have a drill, on the town commons, and everybody was expected to come to services with their rifle and their accoutrements. Fascinating book, a great book. There is I know currently there is several different pastors around the country who are conservatives who are beginning to realize, you know what, I need to be teaching the rudiments of basic American civics to my congregation. I need to be talking about that. And I think that's something that we have to move towards as well. We've got to instill in each good, decent American that if they want to preserve their American way of life, now is the time to spend. I only ask for 3 hours a month. It takes about 3 hours a month to go and get involved in the best possible way politically, and that is at your local Republican Party committee meeting. You have to find that. I have instructions on my site on how to find that. I have information about all 50 states. One of the things I think I have on my site, these books that I just mentioned on the helpful links page. A bunch of us about 10 years ago, we were all writers at Red State. We got together and shared just what you asked me. Are there any books that inspired you? And we compiled a really long list. And I should probably put that entire list on my site. So thanks for asking that question.
You are welcome. You mentioned that it's somewhat important for leaders of religious congregations to promote civic duty. Why in particular are you looking towards clergy people to take a leading role?
Well, because they have such great influence on the people who attend their services. And they have a right under the First Amendment to talk about the preservation of our, right to freely practice our religion under the First Amendment. Rights are like muscles. They atrophy when they're not robustly exercised. And I think all Americans need to read the Bill of Rights and ask themselves, okay, when was the last time I petitioned my government for redress of grievances? Have I ever contacted a congressman or a county board member or a mayor or a city council member? That's petitioning the government for redress of grievances. We've got to start doing these sorts of things. We've got to publish. We've got to speak publicly about our rights. We have to practice our religion robustly and not be ashamed or afraid of it. I actually, it takes a little bit of courage. Years ago I was flying to DC, excuse me, and I had a Make America Great Again red hat on. some guy behind me just wanted to talk to me and put me down, I just laughed at him. I said, do I know you? Like, did I engage you in conversation? Well, why don't you mind your own business? And that ended it. That just ended it. He didn't talk to me anymore. I deliberately wear hats like this. This PC button, it stands for precinct committeeman. While I was traveling here, I stopped in a town in New Mexico for the night, and I checked in, and the lady behind the desk, a young woman, very, very nice person. She said, "So what's your button mean?" And I said, "Oh, it means it stands for precinct committeeman. Do you know have you ever heard what a precinct committeeman is?" No, she never heard of precinct committeeman. And that's the point. Things like that allow you to engage in conversations with people. And I used to wear these when I would go to Tea Party rallies. I would hand out this recruitment flyer, and then I would ask the Tea Partiers, have you ever thought about becoming a precinct committeeman? And invariably the answer I got was, from these good, smart, decent Americans, what's a precinct committeeman? 99% of the time, what's a precinct committeeman? And that's what they're called in Arizona. In some states, it's precinct chair. In some states, it's precinct delegate. In some states, it's precinct committee officer. There's all sorts of different terms, but the basic term is precinct committeeman. They don't know what it is. So that's my mission, is I'm trying to teach everybody, if you really want to help the country right now politically, knowing that over half of these 400,000 or so slots in the Republican Party are vacant, and it's a volunteer position. And like I said, the time requirement is about 3 hours an hour, 3 hours a month. I'm sorry, maybe a half hour to drive to the meeting, about a 2-hour meeting, half hour to drive home, 3 hours. And there the candidates come to these meetings because they want the precinct committeeman to help them. So you'll meet candidates at these meetings. You'll learn about how to get out the vote, how to use the software that the Republican Party provides to us. You got to learn how to do all of that stuff. And when you learn how to do that and you have many hands, then the work becomes light. Like I said, I only ask for 3 hours a month. And when it comes primary and general election time, if you make 3 hours, make a 3-hour effort, 1 hour of making about 35 or 40 phone calls to voters who don't normally vote, urging them nicely, hey, remember there's a primary election, we're going to drop a flyer off at your house. And then we do that for 2 hours. It takes about 3 hours total. You can greatly boost turnout. And I've been doing that in my precinct. And in the 2020 general election, we got over 90% of Republicans in our precinct, the 10 of us all together, each with one sector of the precinct, 3-hour effort, but we've been doing it every 2 years. We got over 90% of Republicans to vote. The average across the state was about 71% of Republicans, and the average across Arizona in the 2020 general election for the presidency was 65%. Only 35% of eligible voters just had something better to do that day. That's what we got to change. I want to get everybody participating in the process. And I like to say in my podcast or when I speak, I'm not asking you to go to Valley Forge for the winter. I'm asking you for 3 hours a month, just 3 hours. Learn for the first time, or relearn if you had civics like I did, relearn what you learned back in 7th grade. And so that's my message to everybody.
It's a wonderful message, but let me ask you this. Let's suppose we were in an auditorium with 500 people and of varying ages, and they agreed to hear you out, and you made this very impassioned plea for participation, and somebody stood up and said, I get what you're saying. I intellectually see the importance of what you're saying, but I've never taken a stand in my life. And frankly, I'm a little bit scared. You're talking about courage, but being courageous doesn't seem like it's very easy. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack from family and friends, and there's going to be a lot of naysayers, and they're going to have my ears. What words of encouragement or empowerment would you give somebody like that to get them committed to take the first step?
I'd ask them to just give it a try. Just give it a try. I talk about sending people on a reconnaissance mission because, I used to be in the military and I used to do stuff like that. Think of it as going on a reconnaissance mission. You're just moving forward. You're going to go and attend this meeting, this monthly meeting. You're going to find where your meeting takes place. Then you're going to go to the meeting. Then you're going to go and just be low key. And, if they ask for visitors to stand up and say something about themselves, just stand up and say your name and that you're here to learn, and then sit down. And then just watch and observe. And then you'll see that everybody else there is nothing, special, not having any great courage. They're there just like you will be there. They're learning how to work together with one another. It's all about boosting turnout. We are so blessed in our country that we have the opportunity to choose our public officials through the ballot box. Now, of course, there's a whole controversy about these tabulation machines, of course, but let's set that off to the side for now. We have a process where if we all get involved, we can ensure that the people that we elect fairly won the election. But it's about participation. Over the years, I live in Maricopa County, Arizona. Over the years, every 2 years, the county would ask and implore and even pay the volunteers to come and be poll workers. And we never had enough. Both parties, they never had enough. They never filled all the slots. And that's starting to change. Now on my website, I have a great website that I link to, saveyourrepublic.org, saveyourrepublic.org. I just by chance before the 2022 election in the summer happened to see it on Twitter. Somebody had posted a link to it. I checked it out. It's beautiful. If you want to be a poll worker, you go to the site, you find your state, you drill down to your county or your town, depending on which state it's in, and boom, there it'll be, the official site of the county or the town telling you this is what you need to do to sign up to be a poll worker. That's what we need, more participation. Many hands make light work, and it is not something that it requires great courage. It requires you to make a commitment to take that first step. Like I said, can you at least give this a try? You can do that.
That's wonderful. Okay, let's wrap up with this question. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your great-great-grandchildren to know about you and this life that you're leading?
I want them to know that when that I did what my teacher told us to do when I was in 7th grade civics. He told us at the end of the course, now think of it, we're in 7th grade. And I think at that time, it wasn't until you became 21 that you got to vote. And what he told us was this: listen, I've equipped you now with the knowledge you need to, if this country in the future, when you become voting age, ever gets into a political crisis, I've taught you now how to peacefully extricate ourselves from that. We have to all pick our political party of our choice, join it, become a voting member of it, change it from within, because it's the political parties that help us choose the best people to vote for, first in the primary and then again in the general. And so I want to be remembered that I took the advice of my teacher. I never forgot it. When we got into this political crisis, and we are in a political crisis, I attempted to engage others to follow my lead and get involved in politics. That's how I hope I will be remembered.
And I'm sure you will be. Dan, you were a prized student of your teacher. You are now a teacher. And I want to thank you for gracing us with the time you've spent today teaching us and inspiring us to go forth and be good students, and exercise our civic duty, and in turn pay it forward so that we can teach others. Thank you so much for helping us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are welcome.